Osiap, Carson Napuunoa Teedstas, Tulalchad Skajat, Ati Williams Ashid. My name is Carson Napuunoa. I'm from the Upper Skagit Indian tribe, and I'm a descendant of the Williams family. Sorry, I'm a little bit binded up, as you can see. I just dislocated my shoulder this morning while I was in my sleep. And so, yeah, I'm a Northwest Indian College, or I'm a student at Northwest Indian College, and I'm a major in Bachelor of Science, Native Environmental Science. And my research topic for my final this quarter in cultural sovereignty was Indigenous people in the Pacific Northwest were more than hunter-gatherer societies. I know you guys can't really see it. I'm sorry, it's just the way the camera played out. But yeah, Indigenous people in the Pacific Northwest were more than hunter-gatherer societies. And so, why did I pick that topic? Well, to me, I just knew that it was a narrative that was driven by ignorant people that came here, early explorers. The whole hunter gatherer society is a label put on us that isn't accurate at all. When people came here, they saw that we didn't have these huge monoculture plots of just one crop and over hundreds of acres, and they saw that we weren't utilizing the land properly as they saw it. They weren't open-minded enough to come and ask us, "Hey, why aren't you doing this?" We weren't doing it for a reason because we had our own systems developed. We didn't need to. If we needed to do that, I'm sure we would have. And so that was kind of the leading factor that drove me to start researching this. But there also is some more here. One of my biggest whys is that I knew that hunter gatherer societies don't work long term. And it doesn't take a scientist to know this, it's just critical thinking. A hunter gatherer society doesn't work long term because if all you're doing is hunting and gathering every single year without any form of enhancement, you're going to run out of resources. You can't do it, it's not sustainable. You cannot sustainably be a hunter gatherer society over a long term period because one, the population of your societies are completely driven by the amount of game that is around. And without you being able to enhance the habitat for both you and the animals, you're not going to be able to expand your populations. And with the amount of populations that we had developed here on Turtle Island, we would have had to have been able to enhance and create food systems that are sustainable for both us, the animals, and the birds. If we were a hunter gatherer society, our populations would not have been able to grow because they would have been dependent on animal populations, and we would have been dependent on the plant populations. And with us growing the way we do as human beings and taking what we do and what we need to survive, it wouldn't have been sustainable for very long. If we would have kept growing at a consistent rate, it wouldn't have lasted us. And you could see that happen in Europe when they ended up running out of resources and needed to go towards monoculture, which ended up depleting their soil. They had to go away from hunter gatherer societies because they depleted their resources. They started moving towards monocultural practices, and then the cycle continued. It went on, and they kept running out of resources, so they went and colonized another place. They ran out of resources there, had to colonize more and more and more. Hence, they showed up to Turtle Island, and they colonized us because they didn't know how to enhance their resources. And so another reason why I picked this is because I had heard stories of our camas fields and our berry plots at Upper Skagit from my Uppy Laura and my Uncle Scott. I remember them telling me about the controlled burns that created berry plots, and then that would create grazing land for the elk and the deer and the mountain goats. Like we had these huge plots of food that we depended on. So I remember hearing that, and that stuck with me for a while. It never left my mind. And later on, I ended up finding permaculture YouTube videos. And these YouTube videos, because I remember I've always been into creating food systems. I've always been into like gardening practices. I've always been into how can we be sustainable. Well, I remember coming across permaculture, which is short for permanent permanent agriculture. And so I remember watching those YouTube videos, and I was like, okay, this sounds a lot like what I believe that we practiced. And so after watching these videos and then coming across this class with this final, I said that Indigenous people in the Pacific Northwest were more than hunter-gatherer societies because I believed that we practiced permaculture. And so now I just needed a way to prove that we practiced permaculture. I needed some way to prove that historically we did practice permaculture, because that is kind of hard to prove, because it's hard to prove when people live by the narrative that we were hunter-gatherer societies and that was it. That was all we were. And so I was like, okay, well, how do I prove that we were more than that? And so that's kind of what led me to, when I first started doing research in the beginning of this quarter, I started looking into sources. So I started reading The Edible Ecosystem Solution by Zach Lokes, Growing Biodiversity in Your Backyard and Beyond. This right here, this part of his title, The Edible Ecosystem Solution. That is what he defines permaculture to be. He defines permaculture to be creating, because permaculture is replicating a natural ecosystem to create regenerative, what they call farming. I don't call it farming. The edible ecosystem solution is exactly what permaculture is. You are creating an edible ecosystem, and that is what Native people did. We created edible ecosystems that benefited us, the animals, the plants, and the birds. And so I remember reading that and I'm like, that is what we did. We created edible ecosystems. That is what I was looking for. And so this kind of started me down the line of, okay, well, now I need to find indigenous sources to kind of support what I'm saying here. And so go down here. This is in the wrong order. Sorry. I found some sources by science.org and Nat Geographic. They both talked about the same story. They both were proving the same story. They found proof because Native peoples in BC, First Nations, they had noticed that the best places to find their traditional foods in the most abundance and in the most biodiversity was near their traditional village sites. So why was all of their traditional foods the most abundant food sources in their traditional villages where their ancestors had lived before? Why was there these huge food forests there? Well, it's because it was deliberately cultivated, deliberately planted by indigenous peoples there. And so this is kind of one of the biggest things that I think has come up in recent times that have proven that we created food systems. And in the article, they had mentioned that food forest had to have been over 150 years old. And something I talked about in my paper is that in my Biology 104 class this quarter, we talked about land ethics. And land ethics, by the definition that I made, was that we as humans acknowledge that we are bad for this earth, and that in the grand schemes of the way that this earth works, we are insignificant, but working towards leaving a positive impact. And that is exactly what our ancestors did. I'd imagine a long, long time ago, it came from the story that we read in biology. It was more of a poem, more of a theory. Could be true, could not be. But it makes sense to me, so I'm going to stick with it. So a long time ago, long, long ago, there was this hunter that just kept on hunting. He had developed the spear. It was the greatest weapon known to mankind at that time. So he just kept on hunting and hunting and hunting, and eventually caused mass extinctions. And the ecosystems around him, because of these extinctions, collapsed. because he kept hunting, because it was more than hunting for food. It became more of an instinct. It became more of a need. They needed to hunt. So what ended up happening was these huge ecosystems collapsed, and the people here learned from that. They decided, okay, well, let's not do that anymore. We are definitely a problem. Everything around us is collapsing. We need to do something different. And so what happened is land ethics came to be. They acknowledged that they were insignificant, that they were bad for the earth. And what I'll say about the insignificant part, if humans were to go extinct tomorrow, there would be maybe a few bacterial species that would go extinct that live on humans. But other than that, the entirety of Earth would flourish. They would all recover and everything would be great. It would be functioning perfect. If ants, a being that we see as small, went extinct tomorrow, entire ecosystems would collapse. Like it would be mayhem. Everything would be falling apart. So that is how insignificant we are in the grand scheme of things on Earth, the Earth. And so our ancestors knew that from past experiences, and they learned from it, and they said, okay, well, how are we going to positively impact the Earth? And this here, the science.org and Nat Geographic, that is proof that humans can leave a positive impact on this Earth because our ancestors knew that. They were like, all right, we're done doing this. We're done destroying the Earth. How about we build it up? 150 years later, this food forest is still providing food for the animals, the birds. It's regenerative for the soil. It's providing habitat. It's still doing good things. 150 years, those people were forced out of their homes and gone, and those forests are still functioning and providing food for the entirety of the ecosystem. And so that is proof, and the proof that we decided to make that change lies in native principles, native values. You look into our stories, why is spirituality so tied into our respect for making sure our animals and our birds and our waterways are so taken care of? Why is that? It's for that reason, the land ethics. And so this was the biggest proof to modern age that indigenous people have been cultivating food forests, because this is the first time that universities, as far as I know, there might be more, universities have come out to this area and was like, wow, yeah, this was definitely purposefully cultivated. There's no other explanation for it. And so that was one of my driving factors and proof that we did this. And going back up to here, Douglas Dewar and Nancy J. Turner, that was probably the next book I read. It's called Keeping It Living, Traditions of Plant Use and Cultivation on the Northwest Coast of North America. And so they are what kind of engaged my critical thinking in terms that we had to have enhanced our habitat. We had to have encouraged and cultivated our plants to grow with our populations, because in that book, they did the math. You guys can find it. It's on page 14 of that book. It is, they did the math, in an annual harvest per community, by the way, per one community, not the entire coastline of the Pacific Northwest, but one community would have had an annual harvest of 1 million camas bulbs and 10 million salal berries. That is a lot. And if we took that every single year without regenerating, enhancing, and growing our food sources, nothing would be growing. Our human population wouldn't be growing. Our elk population wouldn't be growing. Our mountain goat population wouldn't be growing. Our deer populations and the plant populations sure as heck wouldn't be growing, because that is a lot of food we are taking. So we had to have had some sort of regenerative way to keep it going and enhancing it in the long term of things. And so this kind of, the whole long term thing, this all ties back in together. It's all part of permaculture, permanent agriculture. These kept coming back year and year again. We kept regenerating. It was a permanent system. Permanent systems. This forest garden that lasted 150 years. Permanent agriculture. It's proof that this is what we practice. but we would have had to have kept enhancing and carefully managing our game, our plants, our salmon, in order to keep growing our population while growing theirs. That is why the hunter-gatherer societies as a label doesn't work for Native people, because this is way more complex and way more, it takes another level of understanding where you live and what's around you to be able to do this. This is more than just going out and hunting and gathering. This is bigger than that. This took such an understanding of permaculture to even make this happen. This was huge. This was way bigger than being a hunter-gatherer society. And another thing that I really, really liked about this book that I ended up using in my paper was that they reference how early explorers drove the narrative that still arrives today about hunter-gatherer societies. It's dumbfounded. It's a dumbfounded word that makes us look bad. It makes it seem like we were wandering aimlessly throughout the lands, just throwing spears and killing animals, or fishing, just aimlessly doing it. That's not what we were doing at all. She talks about how when settlers came over, they didn't see those monocultural plots, but they saw all these food forests and stuff, and they saw like, wow, they are misusing this land, and they didn't care to observe us and get to know us and ask us why we do what we do. It didn't matter to them because we were misusing the land according to them. And so, why is this all important to me? For one, this is important because I think reclaiming this, not just more than the tribal scale, on a global scale, adopting these permacultural practices is crucial for combating the climate change. If we do not switch our values from this monocultural agricultural practices, our world is dying. It's going to die if we don't start picking up these habits. If we don't start creating these edible ecosystems that are regenerative and good for all the beings, our world's going to die, whether we like it or not. But the other reasons for tribal country, why this is important, is because this is reclaiming the history that will restore our tribal sovereignty, our foods through food sovereignty and tribal economies. This will restore our tribal sovereignty through food sovereignty and tribal economies. And I say that because imagine a time in which we can get all of our tribes, we can get our tribes to grow these huge food forests again. If we can restore this, we can build these food forests that are organic and healthy foods. Imagine tribal members not having to go to the grocery store. Imagine they're fed. Imagine not having to worry about your kids being fed because there is such an abundance of food from within our tribe that we can give this to them. Imagine growing our traditional medicines in these food forests, and there's an abundance. And because of this abundance of food, healthy organic food, medicines, the levels of terminal illness and diabetes in our communities will be to an all-time low. Like food sovereignty, Winona LaDuke, I quoted her in our paper, she said, you can't say you're sovereign if you can't feed yourself. Just think, imagine not having to outsource groceries. Imagine being able to feed ourselves from within our own communities, our own nations. Imagine that. Imagine being able to feed ourselves, being able to have there's secretly a burden in the back of our mind. What if the U.S. decided not to feed us anymore? What if grocery stores were gone? We would still have our own food as a nation. Every nation in the world has their own food production. We should have food production as well. And the next thing that I wanted to talk about was tribal economies. By bringing back these food forests, we can bring back tribal trade, and in the capitalistic way, we would have cash flow coming in through these food forests if we scaled it to such an abundance. And I say that because imagine Upper Skagit restores their camas meadows. They have crab apples, Indian plum, etc. Things that grow here on the west side of the mountains. And they're flourishing. And so then you get the tribe on the eastern side of the mountains where things are warm, dry, different things grow, but they also have different nutritional values and stuff. Say like Yakima decides to grow the Wapato potatoes. I don't know much of the plants over there, but say they started to grow their traditional foods on that side of the mountains. Imagine being able to trade across nations, bring back those tribal trades, and then we're not depending on the federal government for food anymore. We're depending on tribal nations. As nations, we'll develop our own trade systems. Every nation in the world has their own trade and their own commerce. We're the only nations today that don't have trade, that don't have commerce, except maybe gaming, Indian gaming. Imagine being able to trade across nations our food produce and being able to share nutrition and bring back seed exchanges and trade seeds that are adapted to environments. Imagine being able to do that. That is true food sovereignty. That ties in the tribal sovereignty or in tribal economy. Imagine being able to scale this to such a point that we could sell, we have such abundance that we could sell in our own markets fresh food and produce and sell goods that we made from this produce, jams, etc. We would be bringing in money in the agriculture industry, and us as tribes, we belong there because traditionally that is history that we deserve to be able to reclaim. We deserve to be able to be in the agriculture industry in our way, and that is the permaculture way. That is the sustainable way that respects all walks of life. That is our way, and that's the way that we need. That is the industry that we need to be in. That'll make us money as tribal nations, and it's in our way, the way that we want and the way that we love as people. And so I think that's why it's so important to me, because I see such a future in this. I see this as the future of tribal nations, so long as we can band together and go after this. If we can go after this, we'll be unstoppable. We'll be unstoppable because this is the future of humanity. If humanity doesn't switch to this, it's gone. And we're going to beat out monoculture eventually because we're a generational people. In a few hundred years, monoculture is going to degrade the soil to such an extent that their soils will be dead. They won't be able to grow anything. It's going to be just like the Jordan Desert and exactly how the Chinese deserts turned out after overgrazing and monocultural practices. It's going to turn out just like them. And who's going to be standing? It's going to be tribes, because this is how we treated the land. And so long term, this is the best thing that tribes can do, and that's why it's so important to me. It's the most, I'm sold on it. I don't think there's anything else that could beat this. This is the future of food production, tribal economies, food sovereignty, tribal sovereignty, the battle against climate change. It's all in here, and this is the future. So I'd like to thank the Native Environmental Science Department for investing in me as a student, teaching me and guiding me. I'd like to thank my uncle Scott Schuyler for even getting me into native food systems and guiding me and diving me into this to begin with. It all started with him. And I'd like to thank my uppie Laura for teaching me a lot of this stuff in terms of the camas and things that we have utilized in the past. And I'd like to thank this class for giving me a chance to talk about this. As you can tell, I'm really passionate about this because I do think it is the future, and it's something that we need to tap into as tribal nations. And so, Da Hadoop Chud, I'm grateful, and thank you.